Hi, my name is Amber Liu. I'm an astrologer and past life regression hypnotist. Today, I'm putting on my astrologer hat to explore Clint Eastwood's birth chart. I have chosen his chart because it gives us a really good opportunity to address some of the most common questions and misconceptions when people look at their own chart. There are two things I notice in particular. Number one is that about an empty house. An empty house does not mean nothing's going to happen in that area of life. For example, an empty second house, which is the house of money and resources, does not mean a person lacks wealth. Number two is the eighth house. The eighth house has a reputation for being dark, being difficult, but as we will see today in Clint's chart, the eighth house is actually the engine, what I would call, behind his entire wealth pattern. For those of you who are newer to astrology, I have a quick orientation on these two houses. The second house is about personal wealth, money, values, self-worth, and how we create stability and security in life. And the eighth house is a bit more intense. It deals with transformational experiences like crisis, loss, death, intimacy, and shared finances, or emotional entanglements with other people we care about. So the eighth house is where people tend to fear most and also misunderstand most. What makes Clint Eastwood's chart especially fascinating is that his second house, the wealth house, is completely empty, which means there's no planet falling into the wealth house. Whereas his eighth house holds two major planets, the Sun and Jupiter. Together, these placements tell a layered story about his wealth, his survival story, relationships, and power. So, let's begin with his eighth house. Clint Eastwood has both Jupiter and the Sun in Gemini in the eighth house. Jupiter is traditionally a protective and expansive planet. It brings resilience, opportunity, and a kind of faith in life. The Sun represents identity, vitality, and the core life force. As for the zodiac sign for his eighth house, it's the Gemini, which brings adaptability, curiosity, and mental flexibility to the themes around eighth house, which could be crisis, intimacy, transformation, and shared resources. When you put all of this together, the house meaning, the meaning of the two planets, and also the zodiac sign on the cusp of the eighth house, you will get someone who can move through intense or even dangerous experiences without psychologically collapsing. There is an ability to adapt quickly and keep moving forward. This becomes especially striking when you remember that Clint Eastwood survived a plane crash in 1953 while he was serving in the military. The aircraft went down into the Pacific Ocean and he swam to shore. Jupiter in the eighth house could indicate a kind of protection in situations involving danger or mortality. And with the Sun there as well, which is the survival instinct. But this placement does not only show up through his life and death experiences, it also shapes his relationships. The eighth house governs deep intimacy and emotional merging. However, Gemini is not a sign that stays emotionally fixed. Gemini wants movement, wants variety and stimulation. So rather than seeking one singular lifelong bond with someone, this placement here tends to create multiple relationships and shifting dynamics over time. And that's reflected again in Eastwood's personal life. He had 7 children with 5 different women across different stages in life. And another detail I want to note here is the ruler of his 8th house is Mercury, because Mercury is the ruler of Gemini. And Mercury sits retrograde here in the 7th house, which is the house of marriage and long-term partnership. This could be your romantic partnership or your business partnership. So this composition creates a direct link between his relationship and 8th house themes such as emotional complexity, shared resources, and recurring relational patterns. And Mercury retrograde often carries a sense of repetition, the same themes resurfacing in different forms. Also, because the sun is in the 8th house, these relationship experiences aren't background noises in his life. They are pretty much deeply tied to his identity and life path. Now, let's address the 2nd house and the misconception I mentioned at the start. His 2nd house falls in Sagittarius. Also, it is empty. There is no planet in the house of wealth. So when people look at a empty house in their own chart, the instinct is often to worry, does this mean nothing happens here? Does this mean I won't have money? The answer is no. An empty house simply means no planets are stationed here. But the energy of that house is still very much alive. We just need to look to the ruler of this house to understand how it operates. So let's go back to Clint Eastwood chart. The ruler of his 2nd house is the ruler of Sagittarius, which is Jupiter. And Jupiter, as we discussed, is placed in his 8th house. This single connection tells us something essential about how he builds his wealth. His money is tied to other people's resources, partnerships, investments, and larger systems. His money is not simply from individual labor, which means it didn't become wealthy just by earning a paycheck as an actor. He became wealthy largely by building structures around resources and influence. Also, Sagittarius here adds another layer. Sagittarius is strongly associated with ideology, vision, philosophy, publishing, and media, and films fits here perfectly because movies do not just entertain, they convey and shape culture, and they shape the culture and worldview. And eventually, as we know, Eastwood moved beyond acting. He founded his own production company, Malpaso Productions, when he was 37, and through it, he took creative ownership over financing, production, and distribution of his projects. And that's a textbook example of the 2nd house ruler being placed in the 8th house, which means wealth built through shared enterprise, interconnected resources, and deep involvement in larger systems, rather than working alone. All right, I hope this analysis helped bring those points to life. Number 1, an empty house is not an absence. For example, an empty 2nd house is not a lack of wealth. Number 2, the 8th house, as dark as its reputation could be, can be the very source of a person's power and financial pattern. I'm Amber Lu. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more astrological analysis and real life cases of past life regression hypnosis.